What is going on, guys? It is Jamil with Millman Studios. Thank you so much for tuning in to another video. Now, if you haven't subscribed, but you find yourself coming back to my channel, you're welcome. You're absolutely welcome to come back, but I urge you and ask you to subscribe so you can get this content as it comes out. I want to thank you guys so much for your continued support on my photo book project, Japan 35 through 35, and my newest iteration, Yellowknife 35 through 35. These are travel photography photo books where I use the Leica M11P with a vintage Summicron 35mm f2 version 3. 35 images through that lens that I have curated for your enjoyment. Thank you guys so much for supporting my work. Honestly, it's been overwhelming and I truly do appreciate that. Today we're looking at the Canon R3. This is my baby. When did I buy it? So I am looking back on my channel. I purchased the Canon R3 2 years ago. April 18, 2022, I did an unboxing of this beautiful camera. I've owned it and I've used it. I've used it for work. I've used it personally. I've used it for YouTube content. This is the camera that I keep on coming back to. And with the release of the Canon R1, or as some of you may know it, the Canon R3 Mark II, I mean, let's be honest, guys. To me, it doesn't make any sense why Canon would make that the R1. Everything about the specs and the type of camera, being for sports, a super fast camera, it yells Canon R3 Mark II. I don't know what happened behind the scenes at Canon or the decision making for the designations for this new camera, but honestly, in my opinion, the general consensus of the Canon R1 based on the specs that we've seen so far, it seems to be underwhelming. Now, does that mean it's going to be a bad camera? Absolutely not. But like I said, it definitely seems like an R3 Mark II. Now we're going to look at some of the specs of the Canon R1 and we're going to compare them to the Canon R3. And I'm going to kind of explain why I'm deciding to opt out of the upgrade. And it is an upgrade, don't get me wrong. It absolutely is an upgrade. Some really great technology. The autofocus is going to be even stickier than this guy. I can't even imagine. Like, this thing is an absolute beast when it comes to autofocus. The best that I've ever used on any camera system. So to think that the R1 is going to be better, and some of the experiments or early reviews that I've seen from Jared Polin, Manny, the autofocus looks absolutely incredible in terms of sports shooting. The stickiness, the ability for the camera to identify a player and to stick with that player, even though you have other players kind of crossing the path of the camera, it truly is something amazing. So let's look at pricing. I paid $7,000 for this body brand new, the Canon R3, 2.5 years ago. That's what I paid for this guy. The Canon R1, and this is according to the Camera Store, it's a local store here in Calgary. The Canon R1 is slotted to cost $8,599. Now, right off the bat, based on my assessment of the specs versus this guy, that's a pretty hefty jump. So $8,599, I paid $7,000 for the Canon R3, which some people may say that's probably too much. However, the speed of this camera, especially 2.5 years ago, the speed of the camera, the versatility when it comes to being used as a hybrid camera, shooting 6K, 4K 120, like absolutely gorgeous resolution, BSI sensor, like so many goodies in this camera. And I'll be honest with you, the reason why I bought this camera is not necessarily because I needed the speed or I needed all of the specs and the tech that were in this camera. I bought this camera because I was super excited about starting my photography YouTube channel. And one way to get eyes to the channel was to have a camera like this. And honestly, it did kind of work. And I appreciate you guys for supporting the Canon content. So for my purposes, yes, the camera is a bit of an overkill. However, I've enjoyed every single second of using this camera and it has done every single job that I needed it to do. Okay, so looking at the specs, and I'm getting this from CanonEurope.com. It's a 24.2 megapixel camera. Now, let's see how much of an upgrade that is from the Canon R3. Let's just go over to the canon.ca website. 24.1 megapixels. Interesting. Now, in terms of frames per second on the Canon Europe website, it says up to 40 frames per second max shooting speed. The Canon R3 is capable of shooting 30 frames per second. I think even the R6 Mark II is now. So the other models are starting to catch up to this wonderful camera, which is cool because it gives people access to those awesome bits of tech. 10 more frames per second is just that much better. I'm not even gonna knock it. 40 frames per second is great. Now, as you guys also know, the Canon R3, and I'm sure the R1 will have this ability as well, is capable of shooting 195 raw frames per second. It does take 0.26 to shoot 50 images at that 195 frames per second pace. And then there is a buffer time of about 4 to 5 seconds for the pictures to be ready to view. So still super capable and, capable of incredible speed. Now the processor in the Canon R1 is going to be the Digic Accelerator plus the Digic X. The Canon R3 has the Digic X processor. So you are getting an upgrade in processing power in the R1. Another upgrade that the Canon R1 gets over the Canon R3, its predecessor, is that the Canon R3 has CF Express Type B slot as well as your typical SD card slot. The R1 is getting 2 slots for CF Express Type B. That's cool. I like that. One feature on the Canon R3 that I actually never really used, I've calibrated my eyes to it, but I've never really used it in the field, and that's the eye autofocus. I don't mean like the eye tracking. I mean actually being able to look through the viewfinder, move your eye around, and then your point of focus is calibrated to your eyeball. So where you look, it's in focus. It's a really neat concept. In my experience, it has been finicky, and I wouldn't trust it on like a job, or I wouldn't trust it when even just hobby shooting. One bit of good news that I've heard from other guys that have been able to review this camera is that it has been upgraded. It's a lot more consistent, and that's super cool. And I really hope that Canon does start to build or continue to build on that feature, because I think it's a really cool feature. But to me, it's more of a nice to have rather than a necessity or something that would put me over the edge to buy the camera. Exposure, ISO range. For the videographers out there, in the Canon R1, you do have access to C-Log 2. You don't get that in the Canon R3, which is a bit of a bummer, but C-Log 3 is good enough for my uses at least. I don't know about you. That's kind of a judgment call you have to make. Now, according to the Camera Store, which is that local store, they have the specifications for the R1. I don't know how accurate they are, but for ISO sensitivity, it says here 50 to 409,600. For reference, on the Canon R3, the sensitivity is noted here as 50 to 204,800. So almost double the performance for ISO sensitivity on the Canon R1. In terms of weight and size, the differences are going to be negligible. The Canon R1 will be slightly lighter than the R3, but this is quite light as it is. So the Canon R1 appears to edge out the Canon R3 with regards to specs, just ever so slightly. It's not a major upgrade in my opinion based on what I've seen on paper. In my opinion, if you have the means and the desire to own that camera, I think you should get it. Honestly, I think it's going to be a great camera. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. The same way that myself and many other Canon R3 owners were not disappointed with this, and don't feel the need to rush for that upgrade. This camera is going to be relevant for years to come. The other option is that maybe you even pick up a used Canon R3, or you can even get it new at a discounted price now that the Canon R1 is coming out. I think you'll be very happy with this camera. In terms of image quality and resolution, I don't think we're looking at major upgrades here. Like I said before, this Canon R1 appears to be a Canon R3 Mark II. It seems like a slight upgrade from the Canon R3. It does not give flagship camera vibes. It just doesn't. And I mean, a lot of people are disappointed. At the end of the day, I don't think it's a bad camera. I just think that it was kind of overstated. A few of my subscribers have actually messaged me and told me that they've either sold their Canon R3 and have purchased a Canon R1 or have plans to purchase the Canon R1. I think it's a great thing, and I do not believe that anyone who buys the R1 will be disappointed. I know that if they're building off of this foundation, then you're good, because this is such a solid camera. So in my opinion, who's the Canon R1 for? One, it's for those who want it. Okay, we're not doing any gatekeeping here like the people that make this camera. But specifically, I believe that the people who will benefit most from the Canon R1 would be photojournalists, sports photographers, like those Olympic photographers. I think it's going to be great for that. For a portrait photographer, I think you're going to be good with a Canon R5 or an R5 Mark II. As a matter of fact, that's a camera that I'm actually quite interested in, the R5 Mark II. That has more of a flagship feel to it. But guys, that's just my take Like I said, I'm not trying to convince myself. I know some of you may think that. I am truly and genuinely happy with this camera, and for a few more years, I think I'll hold on to this until maybe the R2 or the R3 Mark III or the actual R1. Guys, thanks so much for tuning into this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on the Canon R1. Are you interested in getting one? Are you getting one? Let me know. Remember guys, the best gear is the gear you have, and the best photos are the ones you take. Don't forget to keep on shooting.